Nissan has lost the better part of $8 billion in 2 years. In that same stretch, it became the fastest-growing mainstream car brand in the United States. Both of those are true. Neither one is a typo, and the reason they fit together is the single most useful thing a car buyer can understand right now. I've spent 20 years on the shop floor and put hands on better than 3,000 cars, and I've watched what happens to owners when the company that built their vehicle goes through a stretch like this. It never shows up in the showroom, it shows up in your driveway about 4 years later. Nissan dealers are moving more metal this summer than they have in years, and every one of those buyers thinks the numbers on the news have nothing to do with the car they just signed for. Start with what bleeding actually means, because the headline number is the least interesting part of it. For the fiscal year that ended this past March, Nissan posted a net loss of 533 billion yen, call it $3.5 billion. That followed a loss of 671 billion yen the year before, which was the largest in the company's history. 2 consecutive years in the red, no dividend paid to shareholders. The response has been the most aggressive corporate surgery I've seen from a major automaker in my working life. Nissan is cutting 20,000 jobs across the 4 years running through March of 2028. It sold its own headquarters building. It is consolidating 7 production sites inside a 10-month window, including the Apama plant in Japan, which is the factory the company itself calls flagship. Read that list again, because none of those are marketing decisions. Those are the moves a company makes when the alternative is not existing. Here's why any of that belongs on a channel about keeping your car running. When a manufacturer takes fixed cost out at that scale, the money has to come from somewhere, and I have watched this pattern play out at more than one badge over 2 decades. Parts depth gets thinner, so the module your car needs is on national backorder for 6 weeks instead of sitting on a shelf in Memphis. Supplier contracts get renegotiated hard, and the component that arrives after the renegotiation is not always the component that was validated before it. Dealer networks consolidate, and the store that was 12 minutes away becomes a 40-minute drive for warranty work. None of that is on the window sticker. Not one line of it comes up during the finance office pitch, and a buyer has no way to see it coming from inside the test drive. That's the exposure. Now here's the part that trips up almost everybody watching this story from the outside. Most people hear record losses and conclude the cars must be falling apart. Others hear fastest growing brand in America and conclude the whole thing is overblown and Nissan is fine. Both of those readings are wrong, and the gap between them is where the real story lives. The American sales growth is genuine. Nissan moved 242,000 vehicles in this country in the second quarter, up 9.5%, and the brand has now strung together 16 straight months of year-over-year retail gains on the strength of the Rogue, the Sentra, and the Frontier. But look at how that growth was manufactured, because it wasn't built by fixing the cars. It was built on price and on geography. Nissan's American plants are projected to account for roughly 60% of its retail volume in this country for the first half of the year, up more than 10 percentage points from a year ago. That's not an accident of consumer taste. The tariff on vehicles imported from Japan sits at 15% right now, against the 2.5% that applied for decades, so every car Nissan builds in Tennessee or Mississippi carries a structural price advantage over the same car shipped across the Pacific. Here's what they don't want you knowing. The company just reported its first quarterly operating profit in 2 years, a real number, 78 billion yen, and buried in that result are one-time gains tied to those same tariffs. A one-time gain is exactly what it sounds like. It arrives once and it does not come back. And a company leaning on one is a company that still has to find the recurring money somewhere else. So the picture isn't a brand collapsing, and it isn't a brand recovered. It's a brand buying American market share at an aggressive price while it cuts 20,000 people and closes its own flagship factory to pay for it. Manufacturers won't say that out loud because it costs them money and not you. The salesman across the desk won't say it either because his job is this month and your ownership is the next 9 years. Every one of those aggressive deals on a Rogue this summer is real money in a buyer's pocket today. The question nobody at that dealership is going to answer is what the same decision costs him in year 6. That's the theory of it, though. What I actually see coming through the bay from a manufacturer under this kind of pressure is a different conversation entirely, and it starts with a transmission most owners were never warned about. Nissan builds most of its cars around a continuously variable transmission, and if you own a Rogue, an Altima, a Sentra, or a Pathfinder from the last 15 years, that's what's behind your engine right now. There are no gears in it. None. Instead of a set of fixed ratios, that unit runs a steel belt between 2 pulleys that physically change diameter as you drive, squeezing tighter or opening wider to give you a ratio that slides instead of shifting. On paper, it's elegant, and it's the reason those cars post the fuel numbers they do. In practice, it lives or dies on two things: clamping pressure and fluid. The belt doesn't mesh with anything. It survives purely on being pinched between two hardened steel faces with enough force to keep it from slipping. And the fluid in there is engineered with friction properties that let that grip happen without welding the belt to the pulley. Heat is what kills it. Tow a small trailer up a grade, sit in stop and go in August, run it hard on an on-ramp merge, and the fluid temperature climbs into a range where those friction properties start breaking down for good. Once the fluid is cooked, the belt begins to micro-slip against the pulley faces. You will not feel that when it starts. What it does is polish, then score, then gall the hardened surfaces the whole design depends on. Then the failure feeds itself. Scored pulleys create more slip creates more heat, and the fine metal that comes off those surfaces circulates through the entire unit and starts clogging the valve body that controls the pressure in the first place. By the time the driver feels something, the damage is a year old. It starts as a shudder around 40 miles an hour that people describe as driving over rumble strips. It becomes a hesitation off the line, a rise in engine speed that doesn't match how fast the car is actually moving, and eventually the unit overheats and drops into limp mode on the highway with a family in the car. Here's what infuriates me about it. That fluid is the one thing standing between a healthy unit and a scrap unit, and the maintenance schedule buries it. Listed under severe service on some model years, treated as effectively a fill-for-life item on others, and mentioned by exactly nobody at the service counter when you're in for an oil change. I've had this conversation in the Bay hundreds of times, and it goes the same way every time. The owner has 90,000 miles, has never touched the transmission fluid, and has never once been told he was supposed to. That's not a driver making a mistake. That's a maintenance schedule written to get a car through its warranty period and not 1 mile further. Drop a comment below. Has anyone at a dealership ever told you your transmission fluid needed changing, or did you find out the hard way like most people? When one of these units goes, you are not rebuilding it in a corner shop. A replacement continuously variable transmission installed runs somewhere between $3,500 and $5,500 depending on the model and who does the work. Put that number against a 9-year-old Altima, and you have just described the moment a perfectly good car gets sold for parts. The market figured this out a long time ago, and that's where the real money leaks out of your pocket, years before anything actually breaks. Sit at a dealer auction sometime and watch two vehicles cross the block back to back, a 5-year-old Rogue with 70,000 miles and a 5-year-old CR-V with the same miles and the same options. Those two cars stickered within a few $100s of each other when they were new. At the auction, they are not close. The Rogue lands $2,000 to $4,000 behind, consistently, and every buyer in that room can tell you exactly why without being asked. They're not pricing the paint or the interior. They're pricing the transmission risk and the incentive history, because a brand that moves metal with heavy discounts is a brand whose used cars compete against cheap new ones forever. That gap is not a rumor, and it is not brand snobbery. It is the wholesale market putting a number on everything I just described, and the owner only meets that number once on the day he goes to trade. Quick reminder, if this is saving you money, hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep making videos like this. That's the bill for doing nothing. Here's the part that changes the math, and the first piece of it costs less than a set of wiper blades. Change the fluid every 30,000 miles, regardless of what the schedule in your glove box says about severe service or normal service or inspection intervals. That's the whole fix, and it's the one nobody sells you because there's no commission in it. Get it done at an independent shop, and it runs somewhere between $180 and $350, and it takes about an hour. Ask for a drain and fill, and ask specifically for the fluid Nissan specifies for that unit. Not a universal transmission fluid, not something a jobber swears is compatible. That is not brand loyalty talking. The friction properties in that fluid are engineered around the clamping pressure of that specific belt and pulley setup, and generic fluid changes the coefficient the whole design was validated on. I have seen shutter show up within 2,000 miles of a well-meaning shop putting the wrong bottle in. If the vehicle has 120,000 miles and has never been serviced, skip the high-pressure flush and have them do 2 drain and fills a few hundred miles apart instead. You get most of the old fluid out without blasting years of accumulated debris through a valve body that has learned to live with it. Heat is the other half of the fix, and this is where the manufacturer left you on your own. If you tow anything at all, a small utility trailer, a boat, a camper, verify that vehicle has an auxiliary transmission cooler and add one if it doesn't. A cooler and the install runs a few $100s, and it is the single best insurance available on these units. Every spring, take a garden hose to the front of the radiator and blow the cottonwood, bugs, and road film out of the fins from the engine side outward. That stack of coolers up front is what keeps the fluid in range, and a plugged one in July puts the transmission into exactly the temperature window that ruins it. If you're shopping used, and plenty of you are, there are 3 checks that take 20 minutes and will save you from the worst version of this. Drive it cold and get it up to about 40 miles an hour on a flat road under light throttle. Any shudder, any sensation like rumble strips under the tires, walk away. That's the polished pulley face telling on itself. Then check the fluid's condition where the unit allows it, because healthy fluid is translucent and faintly green, while cooked fluid is dark and smells burnt in a way you'll recognize instantly. Last, ask for service records showing fluid changes and treat "it's a sealed unit, it doesn't need it" as the answer that ends the conversation and the visit. Spend the money on a pre-purchase inspection at an independent shop while you're at it. $120 to $200 buys you a scan for stored transmission codes and a set of eyes that don't work on commission. A home health aide in Bakersfield did exactly that last year on a used Rogue she'd more or less decided to buy. The shutter showed up at 40 on the test drive. The shop pulled a stored code the dealer's own listing never mentioned, and she walked. She's still driving the car she already had. Think about the car in your driveway right now. Do you know as a fact whether that transmission fluid has ever been changed? Not whether it probably has, whether it has. If you have to go dig through a folder to answer, you already know the answer, and so does the transmission. Here's what that answer is worth in real money. A retired machinist in Toledo brought me a 2016 Altima with 140,000 miles and a faint shudder he'd been hearing for maybe 6 months. The fluid had never been touched, not once, not by him, not by the dealer that had serviced it for years. 2 drain and fills spaced a few hundred miles apart, and the shudder went from something he noticed daily to something he caught twice a year. He drove that car another 3 years and sold it running. I want to be straight with you about that outcome, because this is where a lot of channels oversell. Fresh fluid does not unscore a pulley. If that shudder had been a hard vibration instead of a faint one, no fluid on earth was bringing it back, and I'd have told him to plan for the 4-figure replacement I described earlier, instead of taking his money for a service that couldn't save it. He got lucky on timing. What he actually bought for a couple $100 was 3 more years of not having a car payment. Run the arithmetic on the other path. 5 fluid services across 150,000 miles comes to under $1,500 spread over a decade. Call it $12 a month for the life of the car. Skip them, and the bill is a transmission that costs more than the vehicle is worth, on a car that is otherwise sound, with a resale gap already baked in on top of it. That's a 9-year-old Altima with good paint, a straight body, and a healthy engine getting hauled off for scrap because of a service that was never mentioned to the person who owned it. That is the part that should make you angry, and it should be aimed in the right direction. Nissan's financial trouble is not your problem to solve. 20,000 jobs, a sold headquarters, a closed flagship plant. None of that is something a guy in Ohio with a paid-off Altima can do anything about, and the company will very likely survive it. Your problem is narrower and completely solvable. You are the one holding the maintenance they never put in front of you, and the entire cost of fixing that is 1 appointment every 30,000 miles. So here's where we landed. Change that fluid on a real interval with the right fluid in the bottle. Protect it from heat with a cooler and a clean radiator stack, and never buy one of these used without a cold drive at 40 and a set of service records in your hand. Do one thing this week. Go find out whether that fluid has ever been changed, and if the answer is no, or you can't tell, book the appointment before winter. The company's balance sheet will do whatever it does. The car in your driveway is still entirely in your hands. If you want to know the 5 fluids every automaker quietly stopped telling you to change, click the video on the right. I'll see you there.